So my name is Doug Stephey. I grew up in Illinois, graduated from the optometry school in Chicago, moved to California to teach at the optometry school in Fullerton. Was full-time there for about 2.5 years, part-time for another 8 or so, and bought a private practice in Covina a long time ago. And the week I started in the private practice, I said, look, we're going to have to do vision therapy because there's a tremendous need to do it. And I haven't looked back. And part of this story is that when Anita worked for me years and years ago, and I can tell you, I could picture this like it was yesterday. We were standing in the hallway, and she came out and she said, you know, I've got this kid that I'm going to refer out for a language evaluation. And I'm going to send him to this learning center. And I said, what is that? What is a language evaluation? And she kind of laughed and said, I'm not really sure. But the parents are reporting that this kid is still having trouble with school, and I can't find a vision reason for it, and I'm not sure what else to do. And we talked about, there was a book at that time that was out of print called Why Children Don't Learn. And it was before you could buy used books on Amazon, and that tells you how long ago that was. And it was out of print, and so it wasn't available. But they said, well, if you're interested in that book, she wrote a new one called Why Our Children Can't Read and What We Can Do About It. I read that book, and it sent me on this course. So one of the things I want you to think about before I get too far ahead, I saw how many people raised their hand with kids. I'm curious for the same show of hands of who's got school-age kids now. Okay. So now what I want to know is how many of you know that vision therapy is part of the special education regulations in California? And if you've got a kid with an IEP or a 504 plan, ever since you've had this, you've been entitled to this kind of an assessment. And therapy to be funded if they need it. And the fact that you don't know that tells you a lot about where your school is thinking. And I can't come up with a plausible explanation other than they don't know the laws themselves, and I've talked to enough educators to know that that's true. It seems kind of ridiculous that I would know special education law better than the special ed people, but it's true. Or they know it and they willfully withhold the information.
That's also true.
And that's also true. So at the very least, make sure you take down my contact information, because if you want more of what I'm talking about, especially when it comes to IEPs and 504 plans, email me. I will email you more stuff than you want to know about. We could talk about IEEs, we could talk about prior written notice, we could talk about a lot of things. And you're an advocate, right? Did I hear you say that?
Oh, I'm not, but there's a training that I'm facilitating.
Okay. So, and I'll tell you another thing too. I've met a lot of attorneys over the years. One I met about 1.5 years ago. She has not turned down a case that I have sent her yet, probably because of the testing that I do and what I know about these kids when they get to her. But the thing I particularly like about this attorney is she doesn't charge parents up front.
What's her name?
Sarisa Rivers. Email me and I'll give you her contact information. I'm telling you, she's pretty spectacular. So what I want to talk about is this whole idea of move, look, and listen. There's a neurologist named Richard Restak who wrote a book called Think Smart. He's written a bunch of them. But this book called Think Smart, he's got a little excerpt in the book, and he says, you know, the parts of the brain that develop first have to do with moving, hearing, and seeing. And I've captured that in the move, look, and listen, because it just rolls off the tongue easier. And those skills should develop first, followed by language and higher order thinking skills. And I'm here to have you take away today that if you don't have the fundamental abilities of how to move, look, and listen, the other things you can't do very well. This whole idea of dollars worth of dimes. So when you think about what I've got up on the slide, I want you to think about, one, how well do you know these terms? Could you define them? And two, how well do you know these terms and how do they apply to your particular child? Because if you don't know the answers to that, you haven't gotten a comprehensive assessment. And the thing that I would have you begin to think about is if your brain only gets a dollar's worth of dimes to spin, the question is, how do you parse out that dollar? And I'm here to suggest to you that you should spend none of your dollar on primitive reflexes, and I'm going to briefly talk about those in a minute. You should maybe spend a nickel or a dollar of your dime on eye focusing, eye tracking, and eye teaming. Maybe a nickel of your dollar, maybe none of your dollar on motion processing. Let's say a nickel. And now you're up to about 20 cents, maybe 25. The balance of your dollar should be left over for thinking about processing and acting upon the world around you. These kids aren't processing the world that way. That's not how they're allocating their dollar. They're probably spending 50, 60, 70, 80 cents of their dollar trying to put left foot in front of right foot, try to figure out how and where to point and focus their eyes in space, and they use up so much of their cognitive resources just trying to do that, that they don't have as much left over to think with. And that's going to continue to be true until we reconcile all these pieces and go remediate them to the best of our abilities so you can reallocate that dollar's worth of attention. That make sense? Oh, and before I go on too much further, I had handed you, right, that little device. Let me tell you about that device. Where'd it go, by the way? Oh, it's all the way back there. Okay, so you want to make sure that that card is seated in the gray stand. You're going to hold the stand itself up to your eyes like a pair of glasses. And the questions are as follows. Did you all look through it? It might have to circle around again now that I'm going to actually tell you what you should be looking at. Well, let me ask you, looked at it. When you looked in there, did you see one or two black circles?
One on, I could see one with my right eye and one with my left eye.
So you saw two black
I
circles.
saw two black circles.
What'd you see?
So one.
You saw one. What'd you see?
I saw two, and then after maybe 15 seconds, it became one.
When it turned into one for you, did you see any white lines in the circle?
I saw white lines, one and then across.
Yeah.
Okay, so look, did you see white lines?
Yes.
Okay, but you saw two circles with a white line in each. You saw one circle look like a plus sign. You saw, you saw two circles that came into one, and you're not sure you saw any white
I
lines?
don't remember any white lines, no.
What'd you see?
I saw white line, like on the way thinking I saw the two circles and I thought I saw two different people inside like a box.
Well, you probably did.
Like they were going on a.
Yeah, there's an aerial tram inside the
Yes,
picture.
two people.
What'd you see?
One person.
I
in
see
each.
a circle.
You.
Me.
Yeah.
Yes, okay. One circle with the white line across and one circle with the line, vertical white line.
So two circles.
Two circles, two different white lines.
Well, we're gonna let it travel around.
It was the same thing.
Now let me tell you what you're supposed to see.
What there was like.
What you're supposed to see is one circle with the plus sign.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Yeah. You see what looks like a capital T that fell over?
Coming that way more.
Like this.
Yeah.
Can
But
I
it
get
crosses,
glasses?
but a little bit, I see the cross, but a little bit more to one side.
Has anybody seen one circle with one line?
It started out that way, but then it would go to the cross.
Anybody see one circle with two white lines and one line that stayed and one that blinked on and blinked off?
I saw all three.
Make a difference?
Is that what you saw?
Circle is definitely out of that.
It
Driving.
was off? Or
It
it blinked on and blinked off? Can we pass that back to her for a second?
And can I check glasses? Does it make a
Yeah.
difference?
Yeah, but go ahead and pass that back to her for a quick second, and then we'll have it come around, you all have a look at it again.
No, I didn't.
There is a method to my madness here. So, you got one circle?
It just goes closer, I have to get that one.
One circle, one line.
Right now, become
One circle?
I don't remember seeing any circles.
they're black.
One circle?
Yeah.
And how many lines?
Right now it's one, but not so that
You see the one that goes sideways?
Yeah, sideways now.
Yes?
Oh, under that vertical and up. Okay.
Does the sideways line stay on the whole time?
Most time, yeah, vertical and in and out.
Okay,
But
so
the vertical one is in the center.
here's what I want you to do.
This one is on the side.
I want you to look again, and when I ask you to, I want you to do this with your right arm.
This one.
Mhm. And when you do that, I want to know what happens to the vertical line.
Okay.
Shake your hand.
Shake it.
What happens?
Stay there. Oh,
Stays there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, stay there all the time. But this one still on the side of the center.
okay, but let's talk about that for a second. And I know all of you haven't seen it yet, but for those of you that have, and those of you who conceptualize what I'm talking about, there's a black circle with a vertical white line that your brain's supposed to see through your right eye, and a circle and a horizontal line that your brain's supposed to see with your left eye. And your brain, if it's able to, is supposed to fuse the two pictures together and make it be a circle with a plus sign.
That's us.
So what you were describing, you were basically telling me, Doug, my brain's looking through my left eye, but my brain's turning my right eye on and off.
Oh.
And that vertical line came and went.
Yeah.
And so here's the thing, if you're, I'm telling you, that when I look at the group that's in here, there's at least 2, if not 4 of you that have the kind of vision problems I'm talking about tonight. Now the question is, well, which one of it is it? And let me tell you that in the handout that you have, there's 2 sets of questions that you can sort of contemplate your way through. And I'll tell you a couple of them right off the top of my head. The headaches or migraines, odds are going way up. If one of these fluorescent bulbs were to start to flicker and it was going to annoy the dickens out of you, that's part of this problem. If you drive in the carpool lane and the concrete dividers are whizzing past your peripheral vision, and it feels like the car's demonized and is going to drive itself into the wall, that's this. I'm getting there. But I got you paying attention now, don't I? When you're walking down or up an escalator, if you got to wait a step or 2 or 3 before you get on, that's this stuff. If you and I were walking down the street together and you kept on veering over into my space, that's part of this discussion. If you tend to bump into the corners of tables or the edges of door frames, that's part of this. If you're always wearing sunglasses outdoors because bright sunlight and glares miserable, that's this. If it's ever occurred to you that there's certain wallpaper or fabric, patterns in particular, that do weird things to your eyes or head, that's this. So what's this? This is motion processing and binocular vision.
What does that mean?
I'm getting there. I'm getting there. What time, Anita, what time should I really stop talking?
I'll be honest, 9:15,
5 minutes ago?
Yeah, 9:20 would be fine.
Okay. All right. So we'll come back to that part, but I got your attention now, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. All right. So let's go through these. So who knows about primitive reflexes? Raise them high if you do. Okay. So I know about, there's probably, I've read anywhere that there's 70 to 100 different primitive reflexes, and there's 5 that gets talked about a lot in education and learning and brain function and developmental optometry. And here's the thing that I would have you understand, that the 5 reflexes, the 6th one I guess, that I'm going to talk about briefly, but the 5 primary ones, they're supposed to be integrated and superseded by higher order motor skills by the time you're 12 months old. And I'll tell you, odds are most of your kids don't have these skills integrated. And you probably don't know that. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But there's this reflex called fear paralysis. You can see some of the symptoms that are listed here. And in terms of how we behave in our environment, I would have you start to appreciate that there's this idea of learning attention and survival attention. And let me tell you, if you're stuck in survival attention, learning attention is out the window. You can try to do learning stuff all day long, but if you're stuck in survival mode, your brain's not accessing learning attention. You probably don't have any of your dollar left over for learning attention if you're stuck in a perpetual state of fight or flight. And so the fear paralysis reflex, as an example, well, when you think about fight or flight behavior, it's really fight, flight, or freeze. And I'm telling you, there's a whole lifetime of expressions that you all know and use, but never thought in this context. And specifically, and right now, the deer in headlights. You've all heard that expression or used it. What does that really mean?
The deer freezes when he sees the car's headlights and you hit him instead of him running.
Why does he freeze?
Because
Paralyzed.
he's paralyzed with fear and mobility.
Well, it's one of two things. In the initial instance, deer in headlights, it really is the freeze aspect of fight or flight. So fundamentally, there's predators and there's prey. That's the circle of life. And prey animals survive by camouflage. They're fast, short-term sprinters. They're not long-distance runners. And if we could talk to them, they'd all be diagnosed with ADHD, panic and anxiety disorders, and maybe borderline paranoid. Except you're not really paranoid if you really are being followed. And as a prey animal, you are because it's the neighbor's cat wanting to eat you if you're a bird. So that's what it's like to be stuck in fight or flight. Predators survive by, prey animals also have eyes on either side of their head so that they have almost 360-degree vision. They don't have 360-degree vision, but almost. And they don't have depth perception because their eyes on either side of their head. So predators survive by having eyes closely spaced on their face. We are hardwired to use our two eyes together, and hopefully in a fast, accurate, effortless, and sustainable way so that we have good depth perception and motion processing. We see fast too, or we're supposed to be able to see fast. So if you and I were walking down the woods, hadn't eaten in 2 days, we're really hungry. And we're on, okay, so we think that we see something straight ahead at 12 o'clock that might be something that we could eat. But before we got there, that deer that's over in the brush heard us coming. Right? It's got ears like radar dishes that are constantly looking around. And they're highly sensitized to movement in their periphery. So they saw or heard us coming, and they froze. Deer in headlights. Because they're hoping by their lack of movement that their camouflage will blend them in with the background, and we won't see them. And we'll walk right on by. Well, if we think there's something at 12 o'clock, but we're not really sure, and so we got good depth perception. We're good pattern detectors. That's why we like playing Where's Waldo and Hidden Pictures things, because it plays to our strengths. We're pattern detectors in order to be able to break camouflage. And we've got to be able to predict the future. Now, you didn't know that with your binocular vision, did you? That you could predict the future. But you do, and you can, and you have inherited these skills from our ancestors, because had these ancestors not been able to do that, they would have starved their genes out of existence. And like for example, when a rabbit runs away from a predator, does it run in a straight line? No, it zigs and zags. It's up, it's down, it's left, it's right. Because that prey animal doesn't want us to be able to predict where they're going to be in the next instant in time. And we got to look at their movements, judge time and space, and make a prediction of where they're going to be in the next instant in time. And if you shoot for where they were, you're going hungry. So we see fast, have depth perception, good pattern detectors, and can predict the future with the way we use our two eyes together as a team. Or at least we should be able to do that. So fear paralysis isn't quite the deer in headlights. Fear paralysis is, and if you've ever, and they're kind of gross, I'll admit to that, but if you've ever watched any sort of a documentary on the African gazelles on the plains, or when you see a lion or catch a zebra or a gazelle, once they're caught, they just go limp. That's a fear paralysis reflex. It is hardwired into us that in those circumstances, and one of the things that I did not show up on here, but one of the things when, I think in the prey animal world, when fear paralysis kicks in, it's like, okay, you're caught, death is imminent, and this fear paralysis facilitates the body's ability to kick in a flood of pain reducing hormones so that you don't feel yourself being eaten. That's fear paralysis. Closely tied to that is the Moro Reflex. Moro Reflex is still fear-based, and it's any sudden change, typically in your environment. Could be sound, could be touch, could be movement in your periphery, could be a change in head position. All of those things tend to generate a Moro Reflex, which is fight or flight. So if you're stuck in fight or flight, you're stuck in survival attention, and you're not getting out of that. One simple way that you can try to gauge some component of a persistent fight or flight, one way to do that is if you have patients stand and demonstrate. So what I do in my office, I have somebody standing across from me, and I'll say, hey, I want you to look at me, arms down by your sides, and I want you to watch what I do, and I'm going to turn my feet way out. Some people just turn the feet out, some people actually have them turn it out and walk a ways. And then you have them turn both feet all the way in. And I repeat that a couple, 3 times. And I'm watching a couple of things. I'm watching, can they easily move both feet out? I've had kids who honestly, they can't move their feet out. I've had kids that actually reach down and grab an ankle to turn their foot out because they can't do it. They watch me do it, but they can't do it themselves. And the other part, so I'm looking at the fluidity of how they are able to move their feet out and in, but you also watch their upper body too. Because classically, in a persistent Moro, when they turn their feet in, their arms do this, and they tend to go into flexion. Or when they go out, the hands turn out too, and they go into extension. That's a simple way to do that. And you can see that if you've got a persistent Moro, that you're hypersensitive to your surroundings. Because your brain now is set up to be in a perpetual state of, I don't feel safe. And if you don't feel safe, your sensory systems better be on high alert. Because they're wondering where the next threat's going to come from. That makes sense, right? Tonic labyrinthine has to do with change in head position. There's a couple of different ways to look at the tonic labyrinthine reflex. One of them is to simply have the patient stand, put their head into extension, eyes closed, and you're looking for stability. And whether or not in this extension, if they start doing this. And then you do the same thing in flexion, and see if there's a tendency that can lose balance or drift. The change in head position and how it ties into components of the vestibular system will activate extension or flexion if you've got a persistent TLR. Another way to do it is well, I can't really do this here because the camera won't see me, but if I was going to lay down on the floor, if anybody has done any sort of exercising, you might know a thing called Superman. Basically, you're laying on your stomach, arms outstretched, legs straight, and you're trying to bend from your core so that your extension, arms and back off the ground. And can you hold it? kids that have a persistent TLR, they can't do it. They can't get off the ground at all with arms or legs, or they can get their arms off, but they bend from the knees rather than from the hips. And I can't remember the last time that I did this where somebody only had one of these persistent reflexes. Pretty much if they got one, it's more or less that they seem to have them all. And all of these things, make it almost impossible to sit at a chair comfortably. So these are the kids that wrap their legs around the chair, they're pushing themselves back in the chair, they're standing up at the dinner table, they write or read like this on the table.
How about pace?
What's that?
Pace. P-A-C-E, pace.
What about it?
Is that part of that too? Pace, pacing.
Oh, pacing, I mean like, yes. I was thinking of something called the PACE program.
Oh, yeah.
So it threw my whole mind off there for a second. Asymmetrical tonic neck reflex. There's a couple different ways that you can assess that. One way is arms are straight forward. I'm not very flexible, so when I say your wrist should droop, well, my wrists don't bend that much unless I actively push them down. But lip wrists, and then you have the patient turn their head as far as they can to the right till the chin's about parallel with the shoulders. And you're looking for whether or not the arms tend to do this, or they turn their head and their whole body tends to go with it. That's a persistent ATR. Or alternatively, you can have somebody down on hands and knees. And what's interesting about coming down on hands and knees is that, let me see something here. So when somebody gets down on hands and knees, if they have a persistent symmetrical tonic neck reflex, when they get down on hands and knees, their tendency is to sit back on their haunches and lock their elbows up. Even though I've gotten down on the floor with them and showed them how I want them to be. And I've had kids where I'll come out here, where I'll say, all right, so come down on the floor with me. I want you to get down on hands and knees like this, and they'll come and they'll sit like this. And I'll say, no, we need to, and sometimes I'll even grab their elbows and try to pull their weight up on their hands, and they'll scoot their whole body forward, and they'll still sit back in their
Like
haunches.
the push-up position, my son does that.
Yep. Or I'll have kids, maybe they get up on their knees, and their butt's up in the air, but their elbows are locked out. I mean, they are rigid. And then I'll reach up and I'll say, hey, we would have bend your elbows a little bit. And I go to bend their elbows, and their whole body does this. When they lock their elbows out, or they tend to lose the muscle control and collapse into flexion when you bend your elbows a little bit, that's a persistent symmetrical tonic neck reflex. And this one called the spinal delay. So I typically have them on hands and knees. I take one of my pens or some other device, something I've got in the office, and I show the kid who's down on hands and knees, I reach down in front of their face and say, I'm going to take the end of my pen and I'm going to run it alongside the edge of your spine. And then sometimes I ask them what do they think is going to happen, or I just show them and tell them, and they start giggling already because they know they're ridiculously ticklish. But so you take that and you just rub it alongside their spine, and when there's a tendency to pull away, especially a significant tendency to pull away, that's a persistent spinal delay. And all of these things just about make it impossible to sit in a chair. Because in this case in particular, if you've got a chair that's got a back on it, every time you go to lean back on the chair, it's like me taking that pen and rubbing it alongside your spine. It just makes it about impossible to sit still.
We call these neuromotor reflexes.
Yeah, I'd go with that. So then there's motor planning and motor sequencing. Yeah. Motor planning and motor sequencing is a big umbrella. Speech and language is a motor planning and sequencing task. Eye movements, focusing, tracking, and teaming. That's a motor planning and motor sequencing task. Putting left foot in front of right foot. That's a motor planning and motor sequencing task. So motor planning and motor sequencing is kind of a big deal. And so to give you an idea, about 15 years ago, I was reading a book called Conversations with Neil's Brain. And it was written by a neurosurgeon and a neuropsychologist who were talking about this theoretical patient, Neil, who had uncontrolled epilepsy. And they were going to do brain surgery to try to control the seizures. And each chapter talked about different aspects of brain function. And I had known about this company called the Interactive Metronome for a year or two before I ever did anything about it. Well, my plate was full doing other things, going out and learning new stuff that Anita had put me on the trail of. And so I knew about it, but hadn't done anything with it. I got to a chapter in this book about how we sequence things. I remember reading this chapter on a Saturday or Sunday, and I came in on Monday. I didn't even really know still what interactive metronome was, but I called up the company in Florida and I said, I'm pretty sure I need your stuff. How do I get trained in it? And that was 15 years ago. I wouldn't do vision therapy without interactive metronome as a component piece of what I do. So what interactive metronome does is there's this setup, there's a pair of headphones, there's a little round hand trigger that you wear a little Velcro band around your hand. It's got a little clicky trigger on it. The big black piece is a floor mat that goes on the floor. And so what happens is that you put on the headphones, and part of the instructional set is, okay, so let's put these headphones on, let's put this band around this hand, and the first task is, you're going to do this. When I start the machine, you're going to hear a metronome beat in your headphones. This is a steady beat. Clang, 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 clang. And your job is to anticipate that beat interval and set the trigger off on that beat. Don't be ahead of the beat, don't be behind the beat. Anticipate that interval and set that trigger off right on that beat. And this software will measure stuff down to a millisecond level. That's a big deal. Because if you've got these beat interval timing problems, it means that you've got a poorly integrated cerebellum and parietal lobe and frontal lobe. And those things do have influences on vision outcomes. So for example, if you were to do a Google search for cerebellum and autism, cerebellum and dyslexia, cerebellum and vision or eye movements, cerebellum and working memory, cerebellum and ADD, there's literature that's going to come up in all of those fields. Cerebellum and cognition, stuff's going to come up. So my own experience is that I generally won't do eye focusing, eye tracking, and eye teaming therapies if you've got a fundamental timing clock problem. I'll treat that first. And I've had some patients where they can't easily cross and uncross their two eyes, and yet when I do interactive metronome, those problems go away. We fix the timing problem in the cerebellum. Yeah?
So I've got a question. I've got a kid that is extremely musical and has perfect pitch, good on the drums, all that stuff. So I look at something like this and I think he'd be great at that, and yet he still has a lot of those deficiencies.
Well, okay, and I'm going to answer that, or make a comment on it. You want to ask me a question too?
Yeah, when you work with this at your place, does it, what happens when they don't have this on? I mean, is it a...
Well, hang on to that thought, because I think I'm going to answer your question.
Okay.
So, well, here's part of the story too. So this whole company was started by a music conductor. And I think that he got tired of conducting music, and he'd be like, hey, you guys in the saxophone section, you're like ahead of the beat a little bit, you gotta slow down. You're over there on the horns, man, you're a little too fast, you gotta speed up a little, you're too slow, you gotta speed up. That's how this started. And I'm telling you, it has morphed into this giant of a thing. So it would be interesting, like in your child's case, in spite of being musically gifted, what would their outcome still be? I don't know, but it's intriguing nonetheless. And just so you know, this isn't just about having deficits, because there are sports teams that do this. There's a couple of pro football teams that have tried this. The military has a bunch of these. I'd be interested in what the military does with this, but they keep that pretty tight-lipped. So you could take an average athlete and make them better. You could take a golfer and probably knock 5 to 7 strokes off their game by changing their timing. That got your attention, didn't it? But I use it primarily for patients that I see who I think are going to have a timing problem, and to figure out what to do about it.
It's also used in speech therapy.
Yes, it's also used in speech therapy. OTs have used it, speech people use it, some chiropractors use it, some optometrists use it.
Can we get an assessment for him?
Yes,
Yes.
you should. And when see, if you email me and if you say, hey, Dick, you talked about a comprehensive functional vision assessment and IEPs. If you send me that as a tagline or in the email, I wrote an article a while ago about what is a comprehensive functional vision assessment. And then I'll tell you, I put in the letter a couple of the sections out of the education code that talk about how kids are supposed to be comprehensively assessed in all of the areas of suspected disability, including the vision piece, which never gets done if you don't bring it up. And then I list a whole bunch of tests that ought to be done as part of this assessment. I'll make your job easy.
Yes.
And I will send you, somebody else asked a question, I think over here earlier, or maybe it was over here, about, well, how do you know, are there behavioral things that you can pay attention to that would make you think that maybe a patient has one of these kind of vision or motor problems? I think if you email Dr. Tom or myself, I think either one of us can give you sets of checklists of questionnaires, if you will, that make it easier to sort of make that prediction. Now the truth is, the easy answer is that, and particularly any kid that has an IEP or a 504 plan, again, is entitled to, by law, to have this kind of an assessment at school expense. I can't say that enough times. And regardless of what behavioral symptoms they may or may not demonstrate, they should have this assessment. So either we do the assessment and put these issues to rest, or we recognize them as a problem and talk about how they're preventing that particular child from accessing their curriculum in a way that their non-disabled peers can do. And it's pretty black and white when you have the data. It's when you don't have the data. And my own experience is that in some cases, a student will be identified as having a reading disorder. Schools won't call it dyslexia. Now sometimes school districts get pushed into spending tens of thousands of dollars on reading programs to try to close a reading gap. Those kids that have the problems I just mentioned, they're not ready for that kind of a reading intervention. It's not productive. And as an example, if you're doing a program that does 3 or 4 hour blocks of time, and your kid gets tired or blurry or headachy or have eye strain 15 minutes into a 3 hour unit of time, let me tell you, that 3 hours is not a productive use of time. Now, if you run a learning center in that way, the truth is, you don't want to know what I'm talking about, because it will cut your hours in half or 2/3. They don't want to know. I from a strict business standpoint, I get it. But I'm telling you, I think in developmental optometry, we're bringing something unique to the table. And we're not heard very well in the educational community. And that needs to change. It has changed. It has changed a little bit, in particular in the last year or two that I'm aware of. It's not changing enough, because every one of these kids is entitled to this kind of work. All right, let's keep going. So this, I'm going to answer your question now, I think. So this graph on the right, there's two ways that you get feedback to change your outcomes or change your behavior. Change your timing interval. There's auditory input, and there's visual input, or visual guides. So if the visual guides are on the computer screen for interactive metronome, one of these 5 boxes will light up. So normally on the computer screen, they're just a clear outline of these 5 boxes. And when you start the task, if you're way ahead of the beat, red's going to show up on the left-hand side with a number in it. And that number is telling you in milliseconds, how fast are you and how much do you got to slow down. Yellow on the left, 16 to 100 milliseconds. We can change these parameters too to make it easy. If somebody's got ridiculously timing problems and they're frustrated because they never get any greens, because greens are like thumbs up. If nobody's ever getting the greens, it's like, well, this exercise is stupid and boring because I'm not having success at it. We can change the parameters and make it easy. So, but yellow on the left means you're ahead of the beat 60 to 100 milliseconds in the standard measures. Plus or minus 15 milliseconds of the beat, you'll get green. Yellow to the right means you're behind the beat, you got to speed up. Red to the right means you're right behind, you got to speed up more. Every time you click one of these triggers, you're immediately given feedback. Do something different. And I try to tell all these patients, whether they're adults, head injury, stroke, TBI, kid on the spectrum, ADD, LD, whatever. If they got a timing problem, we talk about how this is going to change that timing. And so I say to these patients, look, don't get frustrated, because you have control of this. Your brain is doing that. It's telling you, you're too slow, speed up. Well, it's not working. No, it's not working because you're not changing your outcome. And if it's really challenging for some kids, you do hand-over-hand training. You put your hands over them and you do the timing for them. A couple of years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, let's say, because I'm on this company's email list as a provider. And so several years ago, I got one of the newsletters and it talked about doing interactive metronome on infants. I'm like, what? Come on. But again, pretty full plate. Didn't seem like something I was all that interested in. I didn't think about it. And then a couple of years ago, they were going to host a training in San Diego for infants and special populations. Okay, I'm going to go. You can never have enough training. So I go, and it was at a big OT clinic in San Diego, and there were a couple of the OTs that had younger babies. They brought them in, and we either kind of draped the headphones over the baby's shoulders so they could still hear like the metronome beat. And if they couldn't do that, you could put it on speakers. You could plug this box here that drives the metronome. You can plug it into a set of external speakers so that the infants could still hear it. And then what the parents did, or what you would do with an infant, is basically you're doing hand-over-hand therapy. And you know what it reminded me of when I saw it? It reminded me of when kids are little and you play patty cake with them. That's motor planning and motor sequencing. And you're singing a song when you do it.
Wow.
You're connecting motor movements to sound. It's powerful. And if you went to probably YouTube and typed in interactive metronome and babies or interactive metronome and infants, you'll see a couple videos that come up. And so for some of these kids, I've never tried doing infants. I've never marketed my practice for infants. I don't know if I ever will. But for some kids who have significant developmental delays, there's something magical about this beat interval and that movement and timing. It's powerful stuff. Yep.
I'm just curious, doing this kind of work, like this specific type of task, do you find that it, like naturally generalizes to like functional daily
It does.
activities?
Yeah,
or
you
do have
should-
to work up to that?
If you send me an email and ask me about some of the science behind interactive metronome, I'll send you a bunch of articles.
Okay.
Look on our website.
Okay, I'm kind of wondering if there's at all similarity or perhaps difference between like a 10B, CogMed, ADHD programs that focus on attention and memory.
I'll come to that.
Okay.
I will come to that. So, I'll give you another classic example. Some years ago, there was this kid was maybe 11 or 12 at the time. He was diagnosed with autism when he was probably, what, 2 or 3 or 4. Had an IEP for a number of years. And I made his mom think about this one day. I said, hey, how much OT and PT and speech has he had through the district? And it was 700 hours. And his timing on this was terrible. And it wasn't, I mean, but those therapies aren't treating this timing problem. So I knew that this kid had an IEP meeting that was coming up, and I asked his mom, I said, look, bring him in, let me do the IM screening, so I can write you something up and you can take it to your IEP meeting like tomorrow. Because mom says the school's releasing him from OT. Okay. Well, it doesn't mean he still doesn't have motor planning and motor sequencing problems, but maybe they're releasing him for what they're doing. So I called into this meeting and the OT said, well, yeah, you know, I've done what I could do. He doesn't need this anymore. I said, well, he might not need what you're doing, but he needs interactive metronome. Well, you know, Doug, I do motor planning and motor sequencing therapy. Well, do you have interactive metronome? Well, I've heard of it. No. Do you have it? Well, no. Are you certified to use it? Well, no. And I'm trying to be nice about it, but I'm telling you, I've learned that you don't pull punches with school districts anymore. You get nowhere being nice. Firm, yes. Nice, no. But, so I said, well, okay, if you don't know to a millisecond level what this student's motor planning, motor sequencing skills are, and you're doing motor planning and sequencing therapy, how do you know that you're simply not embedding his bad timing? How's she going to answer that? And I don't know that she did. It's like, well, you don't know. And I'll tell you what, I think generally speaking, I think this is true of life, it's a lot easier to develop bad habits than it is good habits. And you know that expression, practice makes perfect? That's not really accurate. It's practice makes permanent. And if you practice the wrong things, you're going to get really good at doing the wrong things automatically. So I think a little bit, CogMed isn't going to do this, the planning, the motor planning and sequencing piece. It's not going to do that timing piece. And I'm going to come back to the CogMed piece too in a little bit. So as an example, and I think Dr. Tong talked about this a little bit, maybe not quite the same diagram, but briefly, when developmental optometrists think about vision, we think about it kind of in this manner. And this pink circle top left corner says anti-gravity. That's vestibular, and how your brain manages space, primarily through vestibular input. Centering is where are you? Where's an object in space? That is a combination of motion processing, which I'm going to talk about in a couple of minutes, and eye teaming. Eye teaming, how your two eyes work together. Because if you're 15 feet away, I've got to be able to point and focus my two eyes where you are at 15 feet. If I focus at 12 feet or 18, I'm not seeing you in the detail that I should be able to see. And if I try to act upon where you are in time and space, I'm going to do it with faulty data. You know the expression garbage in, garbage out? when Dr. Tong was showing some of those yoke prism outcomes earlier, that's visual garbage in, like the toe walking question. That's visual garbage in, and it's spatial problems out. And it's true, you wouldn't think, it's like, wait a minute. What in the world's vision got to do with toe walking? Well, to elaborate on something that he said, if you imagine I take a piece of rebar and I drive it right through the center of my skull, right between my shoulder blades, right down my spine, right between my hips and between my 2 feet, that would mean having a good sense of center. Well, now imagine that rebar could be shifted anywhere in space. I'm telling you, they walk a straight line. Oftentimes. Or I've had patients where they had a stroke, and you hear them walking down the hallway. Right? They're dragging 1 foot, you put yoke prisms on them, you can't hear them down the hallway.
Wow.
What's that?
Yeah.
You put the yoked prisms on them, it changes their gait. There's a website called PostureMed, PostureMed, PostureMed.com. Back in 2008, I listened to an eye surgeon from Portugal come over here and talk about postural deficiency syndrome, which I never heard of. I heard about yoke prisms in the way that we conventionally talk about it, not the way this guy was talking about. And then he looked at about 20 or 25 of us that were at this meeting, and he said, "You don't know what I'm talking about?" "Well, not the way you're describing it." He says, "We've been doing this in Portugal for 25 years. That was in 2008. And if you knew me better, you'd know that I was not happy that I didn't know what he was talking about. Came home, got on Google, postural deficiency syndrome. Articles come up in Portuguese and French. That Google Translate. Postural deficiency syndrome. And the way he's using yoke prism, completely off the charts in the way that we conventionally use it. Pretty interesting stuff. So let's talk about this for a second. So let's wrap your mind around this. Ooh, I gotta quit talking here in a second. Okay, I gotta speed up. So there's roughly 3 million sensory neurons that feed information to the brain. Vision, auditory, taste, touch, and smell. 3 million sensory nerve fibers. There's about 30,000 per ear. There's over 1 million per eye. I'm telling you, vision kicks the snot out of everything. And most people only think about, well, if I see 20/20, my vision's perfect, right? Not even in the ballpark. So, let's jump ahead here because I've already talked about that a little bit. So standard Snellen chart, 20/20 letters. There's also this idea called contrast sensitivity. And contrast sensitivity has to do with what are called spatial frequency. So if you think about playing Battleship and look at A1, there's wider lines. And as you go down, B1, C1, D1, E1, they get thinner and thinner and thinner. The thinner lines are called higher spatial frequencies. Never mind about that right now, but that's what they are. And when you move from right to left, there gets to be less and less contrast. Some people can see 20/20 letters on an eye chart and have poor contrast sensitivity. And those patients notoriously complain of poor vision at dusk and nighttime. They can't see very well on foggy or overcast days because it's poor contrast. That's different than your standard eye chart that's black on white. And then there's something called magnocellular motion processing, and that has to do with whether or not you see fast or slow. I'm telling you, there's a lot of people that don't see fast. They see 20/20, but they don't see fast. There's 2 websites here, pathtoreading.com, pathtoinsight.com, that'll tell you more about this particular program for magnocellular vision or motion processing. The Path to Reading site is mostly about the research that this experimental psychologist has done as it relates to reading disordered younger kids. And I've had her program in my office probably for about 15 or 16 years now, I think, as well. And About 3 months after I got her program years ago, I had a book at home called Vision in Alzheimer's Disease. And I opened up this book, thumbed through the chapters, and chapter 7 was the prevalence of magnocellular deficits in the Alzheimer's population. What? Come on. So I started doing this program both diagnostically and therapeutically in all of my patients, regardless of age. And one of the questionnaires that is in the packet that you have is called the Low Luminance Questionnaire. The Low Luminance Questionnaire is a fairly good predictor of whether or not you've got a motion processing problem. And a lot of people that don't see fast. So in this therapy, the center circles move right or left. There are different spatial frequencies in the surround that only flash but don't move. So your job as the test subject or the patient is to look at the center stripes and tell the computer which way they move, left or right. And the more correct answers you get, the dimmer the stripes become, until you lose the ability to see it. And then it's a question of, well, where do you lose the ability to see it? And you lose the ability at a much higher threshold than you should be able to. I'm telling you, that, I'm going to be so bold, I don't know how to prove this yet, but I'm going to be so bold as to tell you that is the gateway to attention, motion processing.
I have a question.
Yep.
I just saw an article recently on Facebook about why people with autism have difficulty with motor processing, and like riding a bicycle. A lot of them have difficulty with riding a bicycle or running or motor skills. Does that have to do with this, what you're talking about, magnocellular?
Well, so that difficulty is a combination of persistent primitive reflexes, interactive metronome timing problems, wear pathway problems, and eye focusing, eye tracking, and eye teaming problems. You can't stand to look at that. It's worse if I spin it. And I've learned by talking to patients over the years that now when I spin it, I say, well now, when I spin this, tell me if you feel it in your eyes, your ears, your jaw, your throat, your chest, or your gut. And then we spin it, right to left, then left to right. Sometimes it's right to left might be in their eyes, left to right they feel it in their gut and their throat. The jaw's tightened up. I'm telling you, people that have TMJ have some of this vision stuff and nobody knows about.
What if I feel sick just looking at it now?
That's the problem. That's a big problem. And you'll come and try these on in a minute. So what's also interesting is I'll take these two little clips here, and I won't tell anybody. I'll say, well, you know what, hold these up to your eyes and take a look at this again. And they're like, oh, that feels way better. And then I take the clips off and I stick my fingers through the empty holes. And they're like, what? What? That's a trick. No, it's not. I didn't tell you it was going to be better or worse. I just said try them on and tell me what happens. I'm telling you, you have to start thinking about the volume of space that we can see and the speed with which we can see it. And I'm telling you, this group of people, they don't see big and fast. They either see big and slow, or they basically develop tunnel vision and then tune out everything out here. I'll still talk to you about CogMed afterwards if you want me to, but I'll close things up in just a second. So generally speaking, the kind of things that we're talking about now, all of this, from soup to nuts, you've got likely 3 behavioral outcomes on how to manage this yourself in your own brain. So one option is to be in a perpetual state of fight or flight. That group, higher fear, higher anxiety, higher distractibility, harder time thinking rationally, because if you're stuck in survival mode, rational thought goes out the window, and you're more likely to get diagnosed with ADHD or panic or anxiety disorder. So that's option 1. That's how you get to behave, if you don't have these skills working for you. Option 2 is that you learn how not to pay attention. Out of sight, out of mind. This group doesn't pay attention. Classically, they're described as inattentive, spacey, ditzy, heads in the clouds, daydreamer, staring out the window, and odds are you're going to get diagnosed with inattentive ADD. I'm telling you, that's a vision and motor problem. Option 3, if you're going to bring your A game to the table, like I would suggest that you do as parents, and if you're one of the group that I talked about and have these symptoms, you're in a world of hurt. Because you really can't do the other two things. Well, you can, but it's a tough way to go through the day. So if your brain can muster up the effort to bring your A game to the table and override these other two behaviors, this third group, I'm telling you, chronically tired and cranky. They're walking around on their last nerve. They spent most of their dollar just trying to get through the day. And then there's the last thing I'll tell you about. So this comes, well, okay, maybe a couple more things.
Combination.
So here's something to tell you. This comes out of the University of Wisconsin. Mothers of children with autism have the same PTSD that combat soldiers have. You have got to get that in your head. And you've got to take care of yourselves better too. Because if you go down, you're dragging the whole house with you. So quit being Superwoman and thinking you're putting your needs last. You've got to put them up front a little bit more. And then, okay, now this is the last thing I'm going to say. So, all right. So, some things that you've got to contemplate. There's something called a polyvagal theory about affect, emotion, self-regulation, and communication. Polyvagal theory. The guy that wrote that theory doesn't even know how much he's talking about this vision therapy piece. Because he says, the first thing we do is look around and ask ourselves the question, do we feel safe? He doesn't know about this whole vision piece.
He's not paying attention to the look part of that.
Yep. So polyvagal theory. Who's heard of parasitic worms as a treatment for autism? Parasitic worms. There's a book called Cutting Edge Therapies in Autism. Or go home and Google parasitic worms and autism. Stuff will come up. And how about cannabinoids and autism? Cannabinoid oil. It's the non-THC get high part of marijuana.
Charlotte's Web.
Yes.
Charlotte's Web. If you haven't read about cannabinoid oil, you need to. Okay, I better
You have
stop.
all these links, right?
I'm going to stop and then I'll talk to you afterwards.
Well, we have a little bit more time on tape. We have another 4 minutes.
Okay.
If you want to do questions,
Going back to the reflex issues, one of the subjects that I've been interested in for many years but have not been able to find a lot of evidence for is the cross-crawl therapy for reading. What's your position on that?
Email me tomorrow and I'll send you 3 or 4 articles that talk about primitive reflexes and reading specifically.
Oh, yes, I just wanted to know, my son, I have twin boys, and when they were about 11,
louder.
what?
Louder.
When they were about 11 or 12, they were discharged from OT. But my boys, especially one of them, are the type that are always looking for that, that proprioceptive input, and they had vestibular problems as well. And lo and behold, he sort of just found his way by just doing different sports. He loves the boxing, and I think of the metronome because it's that, it's that kind with the speed bag. I mean,
Oh yeah, that's rhythmic movement right there.
and then that crossing of the, the midline, that it's sort of like very therapeutic.
Yep.
For him. And then he likes playing the drums, and again, it's all this beat. So are those things that sometimes that you?
I think that those are all connected to what we're talking about.
Okay, so it's sort of, and I've seen.
Now, I'll bet you dollars and donuts that he still has undiagnosed vision problems. If he hasn't had a magno assessment or eye focusing, eye teaming, I'll bet you anything that that's still an issue. Yep.
So what about the kids?
Behind you first.
Okay, so you're saying in our IEPs, when they talk about vision and hearing assessments, and every 3 years they do the big triannual with a nurse that does all their assessments.
Not even close.
So you're saying we can, at that IEP or before, say we are requesting a more comprehensive vision.
If I were you, I'd write back to them and I'd say, I disagree with the last assessment. I want an IE for vision.
Okay, so let's say mine's in a couple of days, the IEP, and in the meeting, we're gonna talk about all this stuff, but if in that meeting, I say I don't wanna close this IEP until I have this assessment done,
So-
because he's learned to type, but his typing is really impaired by his ability to get his timing and motor planning. So he can do it in a private one room by himself, but he can't do it very well in class yet. And so I feel like this kind of therapy would help him get up to speed where he could use that now.
Email me tonight or tomorrow. I will send you some questions that you're gonna check off, which are gonna be demonstrative of his need for this kind of an assessment. I'll send you the comprehensive function vision assessment article. You go in and ask for the vision piece tomorrow.
What is your email?
D Stephey, STEPHEY @verizon.net.
Luckily FAA videotapes this whole thing, so you can go back, watch it, get his information.
Yeah.
But you and I hope to
I
work
have a
after.
question with the little
Yep.
leafy things you're
Yep.
showing there. So was it that it narrowed their field of vision?
Narrows their field of vision.
Because my son used to do this all the time.
You know what, I forgot that, yes.
The spy
Yes.
glass, he called it.
Yep, I'm telling you, it calms them down. Hang on, I'll
I
come
just
back
want
to
to share something with everybody, and that's that Glendale Unified paid for my son's vision assessment a number of years ago.
And
And
therapy?
therapy, yes,
Mine
so
too.
hang in
you.
there.
It can be done, and I
Did it help? Did it
I'm
help?
gonna ask you a question.
I wanted to ask, those things you
Yeah,
said about,
But they kept saying it's not
caterpillar oil and parasitic worms and polygonal. Are these things that you recommend that parents try, that you think that these are helpful?
Well, the parasitic worm part, I don't know where you go get parasitic worms, and who's gonna write your prescription for them. So that's pretty cutting edge, but I think that you should go read about them so that you know what is going on. The polyvagal theory ties in, I think, to that dollars worth of dimes thing that I talked about. That's
That
something,
seems to make sense with what you said, but I was just wondering why you went into these other two things, what they have to do with vision therapy or
which things?
the cannabinoid oil and the parasitic worms, just.
Oh, just to bring it up as a discussion item, so you would launch off and go read some other things.
And do you, what do you, you and Dr. Tong, do you both do the same thing in terms of comprehensive functional vision assessments, or how do you guys compare and contrast?
That's a discussion afterwards. Yep. Talk to me afterwards.
My son had the assessment for the metronome, and I was really hopeful that it would, that he would qualify for that therapy, but the therapist said that because of his attention, that he would not qualify. And just a little bit that we did that day during the assessment, to me, it seemed so wonderful because we laughed and we were, clapping and tapping a little bit. But then when we were told, no, we're not going to do it, and I don't know how to do it.
You should call me and talk to me. Or email me, and then come and talk to me afterwards. I'll give you my phone number, we'll talk more about that specifically.